A shameful travesty occurred 2 weeks ago here down under in the lucky country. The former Victorian Premier, Dictator Dan Andrews, was awarded the nation's second highest King's Birthday honour, the Companion of the Order of Australia. What a shabby and galling pantomime it is to see this man decorated. This odious creep who single-handedly militarised his state's police force against the citizens it's supposed to serve, who made of himself a tin-pot autocrat and snuffed out civil rights, indelibly traumatising this once trusting populace, who wrecked Victoria's economy, clocking up over $30 billion in debt to fund his criminally ineffective 262 days of lockdown, and who terrorised a politically naive public into submitting to the mass human drug trial of mid and thus becoming, with his chief health officer Brett Sutton and the thousands of cascading apparatchiks of the Department of Health and their global counterparts, the 21st century's answer to Joseph Mengele. I'm not here today to discuss COVID vaccine. This subject has been so extensively covered by credible luminaries of our movement at this point that further analysis from an obscure opinion writer such as myself seems almost futile. However, I would once again call out the important work of Ed Dowd and his humanity projects, as well as his brilliant book, Cause Unknown, both linked in the description, Dr. Naomi Wolf and her work on unmasking the vast cover-up of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, as well as her team's analysis of the released Pfizer documents, linked in the description, which the FDA attempted to have sealed for 75 years, and any number of highly credentialed medical professionals such as Dr. Robert Malone, Dr. Peter McCullough, and Dr. Asim Malhotra, who were courageous enough to speak out and become pariahs amongst their craven and compromised colleagues in the global Gates-funded medical industrial complex. Daniel Andrews' ravenous championing of these experimental gene therapies, cynically masquerading as vaccines, is alone reason enough to condemn the man, not only as derelict in his duty of care to the Victorian public, but as complicit in the thousands of and life-shattering that have resulted from their slapdash rollout. Just a couple of weeks ago I heard of yet another fit young man in his 40s, the friend of a girl I was dating, dropping dead from a stroke. As always, this is anecdotal, and I have no means of establishing his status, although the odds favour it. But at this point I'm quite prepared to err on the side of what is now becoming too obvious for even the most credulous normies to deny, that the dramatic upswing in sudden deaths and catastrophic cardiac and cerebral events in young people since 2021 is a direct result of the COVID. Hell, even the mainstream media is acknowledging it now. See the Telegraph article linked in the description. By way of personal anecdote, and to echo the pronouncements of several previous videos, I can now count no less than 8 young people, ranging from 14 to about 45 years of age, whom I know either personally or through 1 or 2 degrees of separation, who've been struck down by the new phenomenon of turbo cancer, stroke, or serious heart condition. Of these 8, only 3 are still alive, 2 of whom remain in critical condition, and the third now suffering a lifelong debilitating case of myocarditis. And this is to say nothing of the countless others I know who have suffered lesser side effects. By way of comparison, prior to 2021, the only untimely deaths that occurred in my periphery were by way of the traditional reapers of young lives: accident, suicide, and drug and alcohol abuse. You can draw a line through my life in mid-2021, so stark was this shift. It might as well be night and day. The perpetrators of this mass crime against humanity are many and varied and dotted around the jurisdictions of those countries and states which eagerly partook in this grotesque clown show. From the CEOs of the drug companies and the FDA regulators, to the politicians and business leaders who facilitated the various coercive measures to drive uptake, to the doctors who shunned their Hippocratic oaths, right on down to the zombified everyday bozos who jeered at we anti-vaxxers and abetted the grand campaign of stigmatisation and social enforcement. But in the city and state where I live, no person can be held more roundly accountable than the darling of the WHO and Big Pharma, the tin pot general who turned the streets of Melbourne into a tear gas fogged battleground, Dictator Dan himself. And yet this is the man who topped our King's birthday honours list. What a shameful and outrageous spectacle. But let's get one thing straight. I put no stock whatsoever in these annual honour rolls. Like the Nobel Prize and virtually every other prestigious establishment-endorsed award, Dan Andrews' Order of Australia Medal, in fact, represents the polar opposite of its ostensible connotation. His citation reads, "For eminent service to the people and Parliament of Victoria, to public health, to policy and regulatory reform, and to infrastructure development." Allow me to translate. For craven service to the globalist machine in abject dereliction of his duty of service to the people and Parliament of Victoria, to the pharmaceutical industry and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at the catastrophic expense of public health, to the United Nations and the Communist Party of China in the ceding of Australia's political and infrastructural sovereignty to foreign interlopers. These honours, dispensed by pompous dignitaries in the name of whichever inbred monarch or bloated bureaucracy currently holds sway over the realm in question, are nothing short of a supreme contrivance of gaslighting. They are fraudulent ersatz sops, most commonly bestowed upon the very worst criminals of the administrative middle management stratum of the liberal world order. And I call out Dan Andrews' gong, not in a howl of naive indignation, while lamenting the far more deserving souls omitted from the honour roll, but simply by way of underscoring the previous point, that this is nothing more than gaudy vaudeville, a flimsy papier-mâché facade, a sleight of hand designed to short-circuit the limited critical capacity of the average person and lamely pump a few more ounces of diseased blood into the faltering walking corpse of our malignant social contract. Andrews' award, far from denoting any form of virtue, is practically a stark admission by the system that he used his time and power to commit unspeakable crimes, which, ironically, to them, is most likely a genuine badge of honour, and most deserving of recognition. They need only then dress it up with palatable PR to sell it to the gormless masses. It is the same reason former New Zealand Prime Minister and card-carrying communist Jacinda Ardern was made a dame exactly 1 year prior in the 2023 King's Birthday Honours. Ardern's autocratic policies and ardent championing of the vaccine mirrored Andrews in every way, and, except for perhaps only Justin Trudeau, she was the only COVID pin-up politician to embrace the playbook with even more zealotry than Dictator Dan. It is the same reason Tony Blair was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by George W. Bush and knighted by Queen Elizabeth as a Knight Companion of the Garter. Tony Blair, one of the most prolific and hated war criminals in history, jointly responsible for 500,000 civilian deaths in Iraq and Afghanistan, at conservative estimates, and many tens of millions wounded and displaced. It is the same reason George W. Bush himself was awarded the Department of Defense Medal for distinguished public service for his participation in the same war crimes, not to mention a whole array of gongs from various US vassal states. It is the same reason Barack Obama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for continuing the legacy of his nefarious predecessor and laying waste to the Middle East with drone strikes, killing tens of thousands of civilians, as well as a 16-year-old non-combatant US citizen, Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, for which, in a sane and just world, he would have been impeached and imprisoned. It is the same reason Winston Churchill is effusively lionised above all other historical leaders, a wretched drunkard whose reckless military adventurism was not only responsible for the Gallipoli slaughter, and allegedly many more war crimes besides, but whose terror bombing of civilian targets in Germany from 1943 to 1945, when the war was already won, caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands of non-combatants, most of whom were women, children and the elderly. It has also been reported that Churchill was a prolific pedophile who enjoyed buggering young boys, according to the diary entries of Sir John Rupert Jock Colville, former British civil servant to Churchill. However, such is the cult of personality that has been jealously maintained around this contemptible historical figure that the internet trail goes immediately cold, suggesting a thorough scrubbing operation by the intelligence agencies and their friends in big tech. It is the same reason New York Times journalist Walter Duranty received a Pulitzer Prize for covering up Stalin's genocide of the Ukrainian kulaks, better known as the Holodomor, one of the earliest signals of the communist sympathies within the upper echelons of American society, now so clearly on display. I'll even go out on a limb and say it's the same reason Lewis Hamilton was knighted in 2021. Hamilton fanboys can roll their eyes and point to his 7 Formula One championship wins, but I contend the knighthood had a lot more to do with the colour of his skin, and moreover, his vociferous promotion of pride and of BLM throughout the 2020 Summer of Love, when, need I remind you, this Marxist terror group set fire to several US cities, causing $1 billion worth of damage and killing 20 or more people, all while the global media complex ran cover for them and defended the fiery but peaceful protests at a time when everyone else was under strict government edicts to stay indoors and prevent the spread of COVID. One utterly ludicrous piece of MSM cope, linked in the description, even claimed that Black Lives Matter protests may have slowed the overall spread of coronavirus. The point is, they will stop at nothing to perpetuate and sugarcoat their fraudulent narrative, be it their wars, their pharmaceutical crimes, their central banking Ponzi scheme, their sustainability agenda, or any of the countless neo-Marxist permutations of the woke world order. Nothing is off the table, and indeed, the more heinous the act, the greater the scope for gaslighting. As Joseph Goebbels is claimed to have said, if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic and/or military consequences of the lie. In point of fact, historical analysis finds it unlikely that Goebbels ever actually uttered or penned these words. What he did say, however, was, "The essential English leadership secret does not depend on particular intelligence. Rather, it depends on a remarkably stupid thick-headedness. The English follow the principle that when one lies, one should lie big and stick to it. They keep up their lies even at the risk of looking ridiculous." In the context of this video, that being a discussion of the cynical fabrications of the British Commonwealth's honours system and its various subsequent counterparts throughout the states and organs of the liberal world order, the latter passage is, ironically, far more apt than its oft misquoted sibling. I recognise this foul attribute of our so-called international rules-based order, the slimy manipulation of public sentiment by way of medals and ribbons and sappy eulogising for the very worst actors in this absurd circus, and, as such, I find Daniel Andrews' award entirely fitting, and I take aim at it only to shine a light on the true nature of these honours. I remember the way Dictator Dan divided friends and families and pitted Melburnians against one another with his fanatical soapbox tirades at the behest of Albert Bourla, Bill Gates and Tedros Ghebreyesus. I, and those I marched with in the summer of 2021 to 2022, remember the riot police, the beatings, the rubber bullets and tear gas. We remember the journalists who were harassed, arrested, assaulted and imprisoned. We remember them jamming the internet in the CBD so we couldn't communicate during the protests. We remember the swarms of helicopters and the armoured personnel carriers rolling down Elizabeth Street. But most of all, we remember the victims of Daniel Andrews' lockdowns and his effective vaccine mandate. The small business owners whose livelihoods were ruined while the big chain stores were allowed to remain open. Those whose lives were forever scarred through injury. And those now departed, murdered by Big Pharma, by a complicit media and corporate machine, and by criminal figureheads like Dan Andrews. And no medal or title will ever blind us to this. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future videos. Please also subscribe to my Substack at jjdawson.substack.com. And if you'd like to keep in touch, please do follow me on X at RealJJDawson. You can also follow me on Getter, Gab and Minds. And of course, if you enjoyed this, please do give it a like and share it about because it really helps me out.